On the Story Behind Scripture Books of the Bible series, we take an in-depth look at the Book of Judges.
So, if you want to destroy a nation, you don't actually need an invading army.
No, you really don't.
Right. According to this 3,000-year-old historical blueprint we're looking at today, all you really need is one generation of silence.
That's the terrifying part. Just one generation.
Exactly. Just stop talking about your history.
Yeah.
Stop teaching the core principles that built your society.
Yeah, and the whole thing unravels.
It really does. So welcome to the deep dive. Today, we are exploring a roughly 300-year period of ancient history that, honestly, it reads less like a dusty, holy text and more like a terrifying warning label for modern society.
It really is a mirror. I mean, when you dig into the historical and scriptural record of ancient Israel, specifically the era documented in the Book of Judges, you are confronted with this unvarnished, bloody, and frankly, deeply uncomfortable look at human nature.
Oh, yeah. It doesn't hold back at all.
Not even a little. It strips away all those, sanitized versions of ancient history. It shows you the raw mechanics of how a society collapses.
And that's exactly our mission today for you, the listener. We're taking this massive stack of historical commentary, deep theological study notes, and sociological analysis, and we're unpacking this incredible cycle of decline.
Because the shift is it's staggering.
It is. We're looking at a nation that literally shifted from experiencing miraculous, earth-shattering victories to just total, terrifying moral anarchy.
Right, and we want to understand the underlying mechanisms, the why and the how of this collapse.
Because, and here's where it gets really interesting, the patterns of apathy, compromise, and failure that destroyed them, they are perfectly mirroring national and personal challenges right now.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So to really grasp the magnitude of what we're looking at,
Yeah.
I think we have to start by framing the timeline.
Yeah, let's set the stage.
Because this isn't just a quick downward blip. This is a sustained era. We're looking at a time frame spanning roughly 330 years.
Okay, so that's like...
From about 1380 BC to 1050 BC.
Wow. So that's roughly the same amount of time between the Salem witch trials and today?
Yeah, exactly.
That is a massive, expansive history to cover in one book.
It really is. And it begins right after the death of Joshua, the great military commander who led the Israelites into the Promised Land.
Right, the guy who took over from Moses.
Exactly. And the era ends with the rise of the prophet Samuel, which is right before Israel establishes its first human kings, Saul and David.
Okay, so the contrast between the starting point and the end point has to be huge, right?
Oh, it's night and day. If you look at the end of Joshua's life, the nation is unified. They are resting from war. They have immense wealth, and they're, firmly planted in this incredibly fertile strategic land.
But then by the time you reach the final chapters of Judges, man, that exact same nation is entirely fragmented.
Completely broken.
They're living in severe poverty, they're suffering from relentless foreign invasions, brutal subjugation, and a civil war that nearly exterminates an entire tribe.
Which forces the ultimate question, right? How does this society fall so far so fast?
Yeah, and the text points directly to a generational shift. There is this chilling, pivotal line early on that says, there arose another generation after them who did not know the Lord or the work that he had done for Israel.
That single sentence explains the entire 300-year catastrophe.
Okay, let's unpack this. Because it's not just about forgetting trivia. It's like, okay, imagine a founder building a wildly successful multinational company through sheer grit, sacrifice, and a very specific vision.
Right. Blood, sweat, and tears.
Exactly. But then their grandkids inherit the massive corporation. They get the corner office, the corporate jets, the huge profit margins. But they never once learned the work ethic or the core mission that actually built the empire.
They just assume the wealth is like a permanent fixture of reality.
Yes. And within a single generation, the whole thing just goes bankrupt.
I'd take that analogy even a step further, actually.
Oh, how so?
It's not just that the grandkids forgot the founder's mission. It's that they actively took the company's resources and handed them over to a rival firm because it felt easier in the moment.
Wow.
Yeah. What's fascinating here is that we are seeing the psychological mechanism of inheriting blessings without inheriting the discipline that secured them.
That makes a lot of sense. Because the previous generation, Joshua's generation, they had experiential knowledge. I mean, they literally walked through the Jordan River on dry land.
Right.
They watched the massive fortified walls of Jericho collapse into dust. You don't just forget that.
No, the generation that witnessed it didn't forget it.
Yeah.
But they catastrophically failed to pass that experiential knowledge down in a way that resonated.
So they dropped the ball on teaching the kids.
Massively. Without intentional, relentless remembrance, the new generation had absolutely no spiritual anchor. I mean, they knew the rituals, maybe,
Right.
but they didn't know the God behind the ritual.
You just went through the motion.
Exactly. And historically, if a generation doesn't know who they are or where they came from, they will simply adopt the identity of whoever happens to be living next door.
And the people living next door were the Canaanites. So because this new generation lacked any historical or spiritual grounding, they immediately began making fatal compromises. And the analysis we're looking at breaks this descent down into 4 very distinct stages of failure.
It is a brilliant but terrifying blueprint of how a culture slowly unravels.
It really is. So let's go through these stages. The first stage is what we can call fighting the enemy.
Yeah, because when the era begins, Israel is actually still trying to follow the mandate. Joshua is dead, so they ask for divine guidance on who should take the lead in clearing out the remaining Canaanite strongholds.
And the tribe of Judah steps up, right?
They do. They partner with the tribe of Simeon, and they achieve some significant military victories. They capture Jerusalem, though they don't hold them permanently, and they take the heavily fortified city of Hebron.
Okay, I was reading through the notes on this first stage, and there's this wild detail about a Canaanite king named Adoni-Bezek.
Oh, right. The thumb amputation.
Yeah. When Judah's army captures him, they cut off his thumbs and his big toes. And, on the surface, it just sounds like ancient barbaric cruelty. But there's a very specific reason they did this, right?
Yes, there is. It introduces a concept known as lex talionis.
Which is...
It's the law of retaliation, or the punishment fitting the crime. The text explicitly notes that Adoni-Bezek himself had previously captured 70 other regional kings, amputated their thumbs and big toes, and forced them to gather scraps under his table like dogs.
Oh, wow. So by cutting off his thumbs, he could no longer grip a sword or a spear.
Exactly.
And by cutting off his big toes, he could no longer run or maintain physical balance in hand-to-hand combat.
He was permanently physically disqualified from ever holding military leadership again.
So it was a brutal physical manifestation of poetic justice.
It was. And even Adoni-Bezek acknowledges it. He literally states that God has repaid him for what he did.
Right. So in stage 1, we see Israel successfully executing their mission and enacting justice. But this momentum doesn't last.
Not at all. Almost immediately, we shift into stage 2, which is spearing the enemy. This is the stage of incomplete obedience.
And this is where the cracks really start to show. Instead of driving out the inhabitants of the land as they were explicitly commanded, they start settling for coexistence.
Yeah, they get comfortable.
And what's fascinating to me is the psychology of their excuses. They look at the Canaanites living in the valleys and say, well, we can't drive them out because they have chariots of iron.
The irony of that excuse is just profound. I mean, consider the theological absurdity here.
It's crazy.
This is a nation whose God, just a few decades prior, systematically dismantled the entire Egyptian empire, the dominant superpower of the ancient world.
Right. God parted the Red Sea and utterly drowned Pharaoh's elite chariot divisions.
But now, this new generation of Israelites looks at some localized Canaanite militias with, iron-fitted chariots and suddenly says, whoa, that's too much. God can't handle iron.
It wasn't a technology problem, it was a faith problem. They were projecting their own cowardice onto God's capabilities.
Precisely. And it wasn't just fear that kept them from fully obeying. It was greed.
Yes.
The historical record shows that as the Israelite tribes grew stronger and more established, they definitely had the military capability to drive the Canaanites out.
Mm-hmm.
But instead, they subjected them to forced labor.
So it shifted from a military compromise to an economic calculation.
Yes.
They looked at the Canaanites and realized, why fight them and expel them when we can just tax them? We can make them build our houses and harvest our fields?
Exactly. They prioritized the financial comfort of slave labor and tribute money over the clear spiritual command to purify the land.
Which is the perfect catalyst for societal collapse. I mean, when a nation chooses economic convenience over its foundational principles, the collapse is inevitable.
It's just a matter of time. And that economic entanglement necessitates social entanglement. You cannot keep an entire subjugated population living in your backyard, building your infrastructure, and harvesting your crops without their culture heavily bleeding into yours.
Which seamlessly brings us to stage 3, imitating the enemy.
Right, because living side by side leads to intermarriage.
Now, it's crucial to point out here that the strict laws against intermarriage in ancient Israel were not based on race or ethnicity.
No.
They were entirely based on religion. The danger was theological infection, because as soon as they started marrying into Canaanite families, the Israelites began worshiping Canaanite gods.
Specifically, the gods Baal and Ashtaroth.
Right, and to understand why they did this, you have to understand the mechanism of ancient agrarian survival.
It was life or death. If you were a farmer in the ancient Levant, your entire existence depended on the autumn and spring rains. If it didn't rain, your crops failed.
And if your crops failed, your children starved to death. It was a razor-thin margin of survival.
And Yahweh, the God of Israel, is invisible. He demands strict moral purity, justice, and exclusive devotion.
But Baal, what about Baal?
Well, Baal was the primary Canaanite god of storms, lightning, and rain. He was visible in the form of statues, and Ashtaroth was the goddess of fertility and war.
So the Israelites didn't necessarily stop acknowledging Yahweh entirely, right?
No, they didn't. They just started hedging their bets. They practiced what we call syncretism.
Like mixing the religions together.
Exactly. They figured, well, we'll worship Yahweh for national security, but we better go worship Baal just to ensure the rain comes and our crops grow.
It was essentially agricultural insurance. Plus, the worship of Baal and Ashtaroth frequently involved temple prostitution and these wild, sensual rituals.
It appealed directly to base human desires. It was the absolute path of least resistance.
Which inevitably triggers the final catastrophic stage. Stage 4, obeying the enemy.
The lowest point.
Their spiritual compromise leads directly to physical bondage. The text describes God selling them into the hands of the very enemies they were trying so hard to imitate.
Yeah. They wanted to act like Canaanites, so God allowed them to be ruled by Canaanites.
But we need to pause here for a second because the historical text outline very specific warning signs of a failing nation.
Yes, and it always starts with that stage 2 compromise.
Yes.
Settling for partial obedience. But then it moves into ignoring established constitutional laws.
Give us an example of that.
Well, for instance, the Levitical priests were explicitly commanded to publicly read the entire book of Deuteronomy to the whole nation every sabbatical year.
Like a public recitation.
Right. They were supposed to gather everyone together and read their founding document.
But they just stopped doing it.
They stopped completely. The public reading of their spiritual constitution ceased, and when you lose the word, you lose the compass.
The society becomes completely untethered from objective truth.
Exactly. Leaving them entirely vulnerable to the shifting morals of the surrounding culture.
Now, I have to step in and push back for a second, because I know what you, the listener, might be thinking right now.
Okay, let's hear it.
Why is coexistence framed as such a terrible, destructive thing in these ancient texts? I mean, in our modern globalized world, assimilation, cultural diversity, and being a good neighbor, those are universally celebrated as ultimate virtues.
Okay.
So why is ancient Israel so harshly condemned for just trying to get along with the locals?
That is the essential question. And to answer it, we have to look objectively at the actual historical reality of the late Bronze Age Canaanite culture.
Okay.
We aren't talking about a culture that just had, different dietary habits or a unique style of pottery. The Canaanite religious system was unspeakably wicked by almost any human moral standard.
It wasn't just a different flavor of spirituality.
Far from it. Their worship was heavily characterized by institutionalized exploitation. But the most horrifying aspect was the practice of infant sacrifice.
It's unimaginable.
In times of crisis, or to secure a prosperous harvest, Canaanite families would literally burn their own newborn children alive in the fiery bronze idols of their god Moloch.
So for an Israelite, assimilation didn't mean going to a diverse cultural festival.
Yeah.
It meant adopting moral atrocities. It meant participating in the literal murder of children to ensure economic prosperity.
Exactly. The command for Israel to drive the Canaanites out was fundamentally a quarantine measure.
A quarantine measure. I like that phrasing.
Because Israel was designed to be a distinct, holy incubator. Through this one specific nation, God intended to preserve the scriptures, model divine justice, and ultimately bring the Messiah into the world to redeem all of humanity.
Right.
If Israel fully assimilated into the Canaanite culture, that distinctiveness would be annihilated and the incubator would be destroyed.
That makes perfect sense. And the modern parallel here is really powerful. The danger isn't about isolating yourself from people who are different. It's the danger of a slow leak.
Oh, the slow leak analogy is perfect.
Right, because when you have a massive blowout in your car tire, it's violent, it's loud, and you immediately pull over to the side of the highway to fix it.
Right, you notice it instantly.
But a slow leak just makes the steering wheel pull slightly to the right. You barely notice it, you adapt to it, you keep driving at 70 miles an hour, completely ignoring the warning signs until the tire shreds completely and you flip the car.
That is the perfect metaphor for cultural assimilation. The Israelites didn't wake up one Tuesday and decide to abandon God for Moloch.
No.
It was a slow leak of moral compromise over decades until their society crashed.
And that crash, this fourth stage of obeying the enemy, it birthed a brutal, repetitive rhythm that defined the next 3 centuries of their history. The analysis refers to it as the cycle of sin and liberation. Can you break down the mechanics of this cycle for us?
Yeah, it's a 5-step mechanism that plays out repeatedly.
Mm-hmm.
And we can easily remember the stages as 5 S's.
Okay, what are they?
First, there is sin. The people rebel, adopt the surrounding culture, and fall into idolatry.
Right.
Second comes servitude. As a direct consequence, the protective hand of God lifts and foreign enemies invade, oppress, and enslave the Israelites.
And this wasn't a quick thing. Sometimes they were enslaved for 8 years, sometimes for 20, sometimes for 40 years of brutal subjugation.
Yes, which leads to the third step, supplication. Eventually, the agony becomes too great, and the people finally cry out to God in distress.
They hit rock bottom.
Exactly. Fourth is salvation. God, in his immense mercy, raises up a human leader, a judge, to execute a military and spiritual deliverance.
And then the final step.
The fifth step is silence. The land enjoys a period of rest and peace during the lifetime of that judge.
But the critical insight here is that this isn't a flat circle. They aren't just going round and round on a carousel.
No, it is a downward spiral.
Like water circling a drain. Every single time they went through the cycle, the repentance was shallower, the idolatry was deeper, and the people became more corrupt than the generation before them.
Yes.
Even the judges themselves, the leaders sent to save them, they become progressively more flawed and chaotic.
The cycle itself is a mechanism of deterioration. And what I found absolutely fascinating in the sociological analysis of these texts is how closely this ancient biblical spiral maps onto modern theories of civilization.
Yes. I wanted to spend some real time on this.
Specifically, Alexander Tytler's Cycle of Nations theory.
Because when you read Tyler's theory, it feels like someone is just reading today's newspaper headlines. Walk us through this cycle.
So, Alexander Tytler was an 18th century Scottish historian, and after studying the rise and fall of the world's great republics like Athens and Rome, he suggested a highly predictable 9-step lifespan for great civilizations.
Okay.
The cycle always begins in bondage. The people are oppressed. Out of that deep oppression, the people develop a profound spiritual faith.
Right, because when you are in bondage, God is literally all you have left to rely on.
Exactly. That intense spiritual faith then produces great courage. People with deep convictions are willing to risk their lives.
Which leads to...
That courage inevitably leads to liberty. They fight for and win their freedom. And the natural byproduct of liberty and free enterprise is abundance. The society becomes wealthy and prosperous.
And this is where the hinge of history turns. Because abundance should lead to gratitude, but historically, it never does.
No, historically, abundance leads directly to complacency. The struggles of the past are forgotten. The generation that fought for the liberty dies off, and the new generation just expects the abundance as a baseline right.
Just like the generation after Joshua.
Precisely. Complacency then degrades into apathy. The citizens stop caring about civic duty, moral foundations, or the truth. They only care about maintaining their personal comfort.
The slow leak.
Yes. And apathy inevitably shifts into dependency. Because the people no longer have the internal courage or work ethic to maintain their society, they begin relying entirely on the state or on foreign powers to provide for them. And finally, dependency leads the society right back into bondage.
Wow. From bondage right back to bondage.
It's a sobering reality.
Let's really look at this because the parallels to modern national challenges are chilling. And keeping strict political neutrality here, just looking at observable human behavior, the sociological data suggests that many modern, prosperous Western nations are currently transitioning rapidly. We are moving out of the abundance phase, we firmly settled into complacency, and we are aggressively sliding into apathy.
It is a phenomenal framework for understanding how societies drift when they lose their founding moral anchors. When a culture replaces conviction with comfort, you get cultural apathy.
And today's cultural apathy perfectly mirrors the ancient Israelites losing their spiritual heritage.
It really does. When the primary goal of your society is simply acquiring religious, intellectual, or economic fast food, the quick, comfortable answers that demand absolutely zero sacrifice, your society is on the precipice of dependency.
It's terrifying, but it's undeniable. Okay, before we get into the actual stories of the human leaders, these judges who are fighting inside this downward spiral, we have to set the stage geographically and theologically.
That's a great point.
Let's talk about the terrain, because in the ancient Near East, geography was destiny.
Absolutely. The land itself tells a story of what is happening to the people. Let's contrast two key locations, Hebron and Jericho.
Okay, let's start with Hebron.
Hebron represents a massive early success story. Caleb, who was one of the original Israelite spies who scouted the land with Joshua decades earlier, was promised the territory of Hebron. But Hebron was considered virtually unconquerable.
Why?
It was a massive fortress city inhabited by the Anakim.
The Anakim. We need context here. These are the descendants of the Nephilim.
Right.
When the Israelites first arrived at the border of Canaan 40 years earlier, these are the literal giants that terrified them so badly they refused to enter the land. They said, we looked like grasshoppers next to them.
Right. They were the most fearsome, genetically dominant warriors in the region. But Caleb, who is now an old man in his 80s, doesn't rely on military superiority.
What does he do?
He relies entirely on his faith in the mechanism of God's promise. He marches into Hebron and systematically drives the giants out.
As an 80-year-old man.
Exactly. It is a stunning testament to what was possible when unshakable faith was applied to an impossible obstacle. Hebron eventually becomes a fortified city of refuge and a center of stability.
And then on the complete opposite end of the spectrum, you have Jericho.
Jericho is a tragedy of shifting boundaries. Jericho was the site of the very first, most famous, miraculous victory under Joshua, where the walls collapsed.
Right.
After that victory, Joshua placed a strict divine curse on the site, commanding that it remain a deserted ruin forever as a monument to God's power.
But by the time we are deep into the period of the Judges, Jericho, which the text calls the City of Palms, is no longer a deserted ruin.
No. It has been re-inhabited. It becomes a refuge for a group called the Canaanites. Now, the Canaanites were descendants of Moses' father-in-law. They were historical allies of Israel.
Right.
But the fact that they are living in a cursed, ruined city illustrates the chaotic, fluid nature of this era. The Israelites are ignoring the old boundaries. They are ignoring the monuments of the past. The geography itself reflects their spiritual amnesia.
And right in the middle of this geographical and spiritual chaos, there is a recurring divine presence that initiates the rescues. This is one of the most fascinating theological elements of the whole era.
It really stands out.
The texts put a massive emphasis on a figure called the Angel of the Lord. This figure shows up at a place called Bochim to confront the entire nation about their compromises. He shows up sitting under an oak tree in Ophrah to call Gideon to war. He appears to Samson's parents. Who exactly is this? Because this isn't just a regular angel with wings and a halo.
No, this is a profound theological point that the historical commentators emphasize. In these specific Old Testament passages, the angel of the Lord is identified as a Christophany.
Let's define that for the listener. A Christophany is a pre-incarnate appearance of Jesus Christ in the Old Testament before he was born in Bethlehem.
Exactly. And the textual evidence for this is undeniable. Normal angels in biblical theology are strictly messengers. They vehemently refuse worship.
Right. They always say, don't worship me.
Yes. But this specific angel speaks in the first person as God. He says, I brought you up from Egypt. He accepts physical worship. He accepts animal sacrifices. He is identified directly and interchangeably with Yahweh.
Why does that matter so much to the narrative of Judges?
Think about the mechanism of grace it reveals. Israel is at its absolute worst. They are burning their children. They're worshiping weather gods. They are slaughtering each other.
It's complete.
And God doesn't just send a memo or a distant prophet. He physically, personally steps down into the dirt, into the violence, and into the mess to orchestrate their deliverance.
Wow.
It shows that even when humanity is utterly depraved, God's grace compels him to intervene. He cannot bear to watch them destroy themselves without offering a way out.
That is a staggering thought. God provides the initial spark of salvation, but the human instruments he uses to carry out that salvation, these leaders called judges, man, they're a mess.
Oh, they are deeply flawed.
And their personal moral failures severely accelerate the nation's downward spiral. Let's trace this descent by looking at the judges themselves.
Well, the era of the judges actually starts off relatively pure. The very first judge is a man named Othniel. He is Caleb's nephew, so he still has a connection to that older, faithful generation.
So he knows the history.
Right. His record is essentially flawless. He goes to war, he defeats a Mesopotamian king, and he secures 40 years of peace for the land. He is the baseline of what a judge is supposed to be.
But immediately after him, we get Ehud.
Ah, Ehud.
I was reading the story, and honestly, it reads like a script for a Quentin Tarantino movie. It is visceral, it is bloody, and it is brilliant. Set the scene for us.
Israel is being brutally oppressed by Eglon, the king of Moab. The text makes a very specific point to tell us that King Eglon was an incredibly obese man.
Okay.
Ehud, who is from the tribe of Benjamin, is chosen to deliver the annual tribute money to the king. But Ehud secretly forges a custom double-edged dagger about 18 inches long.
And he straps it to his right thigh, hidden under his clothes.
Which is the brilliant tactical move. Because the vast majority of warriors in the ancient world were right-handed, guards would naturally pat down a man's left thigh, where a right-handed man would draw his sword from.
But the text highlights that Ehud was left-handed.
He was an anomaly.
Yes. So he passes the security check, presents the tribute, and then dismisses the entourage. He tells King Eglon, "I have a secret message for you, O king."
Eglon is intrigued, so he dismisses his guards and stands up out of his throne.
At that moment, Ehud reaches with his left hand, draws the dagger from his right thigh, and plunges it upward into the king's belly.
The biblical text is graphically detailed here.
Yeah.
It literally says the king was so heavy that his fat closed over the blade, the handle sank in, and the contents of his bowels emptied out.
It is incredibly graphic. Ehud then locks the doors of the roof chamber, escapes through the latrine system, and by the time the guards finally get nervous and unlock the doors, Ehud has already blown the trumpet in the hill country and rallied the Israelite army to cut off the Moabite retreat.
It's a mastermind assassination. But beyond the cinematic thrill of the story, there is a deep theological mechanism at play.
What's that?
In that ancient culture, being left-handed was often viewed as a physical defect or a severe disadvantage. But God specifically leverages the exact trait that the world views as a weakness to accomplish his deliverance.
Wow.
Ehud's unique physical anomaly was the exact key needed to bypass the enemy's defenses, resulting in 80 years of peace, the longest stretch in the entire book.
But the piece doesn't hold. They slide back down the spiral, which brings us to a much more complicated leadership dynamic. Deborah and Barak.
Deborah is entirely unique in this history. She is a prophetess, and she is the only female judge mentioned. She is holding court under a palm tree, providing actual judicial wisdom, which indicates a massive vacuum of male leadership in the nation.
Right. When the Canaanite king Jabin and his ruthless general Sisera oppress Israel with 900 iron chariots, Deborah summons an Israelite military commander named Barak.
And she gives him a direct divine order. She says, God commands you to take 10,000 men to Mount Tabor, and God will draw Sisera's chariots out to the river Kishon, and God will give them into your hand.
It's a guaranteed victory.
But Barak hesitates.
He fundamentally lacks the courage of his convictions. He looks at Deborah and says, "If you go with me, I will go, but if you will not go with me, I will not go."
He is treating the presence of the prophetess as a lucky rabbit's foot. He trusts Deborah more than he trusts the word of God that Deborah delivered.
Exactly. And because of his hesitation, Deborah prophesies a consequence. She says, "I will surely go with you. Nevertheless, the road on which you are going will not lead to your glory, for the Lord will sell Sisera into the hand of a woman."
And the mechanism of how that prophecy is fulfilled is wild.
Let's hear it.
The battle happens. A miraculous, unseasonal torrential rainstorm hits the valley, instantly turning the ground into deep mud. The 900 dreaded iron chariots, the ultimate ancient superweapons, are completely bogged down and rendered useless.
Nature just turns against them.
Right, Barak's infantry wipes them out. But the general, Sisera, abandons his chariot and flees on foot. He desperately seeks refuge in the tent of a nomadic woman named Jael, whose family had an alliance with Canaanites.
Jael invites him in. She hides him under a rug. He asks for a drink of water, but she opens a skin of milk, which in the ancient world was a warm, heavy drink designed to make you drowsy.
The exhausted general falls into a deep sleep.
And then Jael grabs a heavy wooden tent peg and a hammer, creeps up softly beside him, and drives the peg straight through his temples, pinning his skull into the dirt floor.
Again, the violence is shocking to modern ears. But it completely fulfills the prophecy.
Barak won the battle, But because of his cowardly hesitation, a nomadic woman in a tent took the ultimate glory of defeating the enemy commander.
From Barak's hesitation, the downward spiral accelerates, leading us to Gideon.
Gideon is a massive turning point in the history of Israel. When we first meet him, he isn't exactly radiating hero energy.
Not at all. The Midianites are the current oppressors, and the Midianites were utilizing a brand new, terrifying military technology.
Yeah.
Massive swarms of domesticated camels. They would wait until the Israelites grew their crops, and then they would sweep across the land like locusts, traveling vast distances incredibly fast, stealing all the livestock and grain. It was agrarian terrorism.
So when the angel of the Lord appears to Gideon, Gideon is hiding at the bottom of a winepress, a sunken stone pit, trying to secretly thresh a little bit of wheat so the Midianites won't see him.
Right.
The angel appears and says, "The Lord is with you, O mighty man of valor," which almost sounds like divine sarcasm.
Gideon's immediate reaction reveals the deep spiritual cynicism of his generation. He argues back. He says, if the Lord is with us, why then has all this happened to us? And where are all his wonderful deeds that our fathers recounted to us?
He essentially accuses God of abandoning them, completely ignoring the fact that it was Israel's rampant idolatry that caused the oppression in the first place.
Exactly. But God is incredibly patient. He commissions Gideon to save Israel, which leads to the famous incident of the fleece.
Now, I hear people use this phrase all the time today. I really want to take this new job, so I'm putting out a fleece to see what God's will is. We treat it like it's this pinnacle of deep faith.
That is one of the most common modern misunderstandings of the text. When you analyze Gideon's actions, putting out the fleece was not an act of faith. It was an act of profound doubt and manipulation.
Walk us through the mechanism of what he actually did.
So, God had already spoken to Gideon. He had already performed a miracle by consuming a meat offering with fire from a rock. God had explicitly promised victory.
He had all the proof he needed.
Right. But Gideon is still terrified of the Midianite army. So he takes a fleece of wool, puts it on the threshing floor, and tells God, if you will save Israel by my hand, as you have said, let there be dew on the fleece only, and let the ground be dry.
And God actually does it.
God graciously humors him. The next morning, Gideon wrings a bowl full of water out of the fleece.
But even that isn't enough.
No. Gideon is still paralyzed by fear. So he demands a second reverse miracle. He says, let the fleece be dry and let the dew be on the ground. God humors him again.
Unbelievable.
But the historical commentators make it clear. Gideon was demanding that God repeatedly jump through empirical hoops because he lacked the faith to trust the clear word he had already received.
We've all done this, right? Lord, if I'm supposed to buy this specific car, let the very next traffic light be green. We call it seeking God's will, but really it's just us trying to manipulate the universe into endorsing our own hesitation.
Exactly. But God works with Gideon anyway. Gideon gathers a massive army of 32,000 Israelites. But then God does something radically counterintuitive. He looks at the army and says, you have too many men.
32,000 men against a Midianite coalition of over 135,000. And God says it's too many.
Because God understands the mechanism of human pride. He explicitly tells Gideon, lest Israel boast over me, saying, my own hand has saved me. God wants to ensure the odds are so completely absurd that no one can take the credit. So he institutes a series of tests. First, anyone who is afraid is allowed to go home. 22,000 men immediately leave.
Over 2/3 of the army just walks away.
Then God takes the remaining 10,000 down to the water to drink. He separates them based on how they drink, whether they lap the water from their hands while staying alert or get down on their knees. Only 300 men stay alert.
So God says, with these 300 men, I will save you.
300 men against 135,000. It is a suicide mission.
But the actual battle tactics they use are a masterclass in ancient psychological warfare. How do they do it?
They don't even use swords for the initial attack. Gideon divides the 300 men into 3 companies. They surround the massive Midianite camp in the dead of night. Each man is holding a trumpet in one hand and an empty clay jar in the other, with a burning torch hidden inside the jar.
Okay, I can see where this is going.
On Gideon's signal, all 300 men simultaneously smash the clay jars, exposing the blazing torches, blow the trumpets and scream, a sword for the Lord and for Gideon.
It's sheer sensory overload. The Midianites are jolted out of a deep sleep. In the pitch black, surrounded by the sudden crash of pottery, the blinding light of 300 torches, and the blaring of trumpets from every direction, they assume they are being overrun by a massive, overwhelming force.
Absolute panic ensues. The Midianites draw their swords and, in the confusion and darkness, begin slaughtering each other. The vast army breaks and flees, and Israel achieves an impossible, miraculous victory.
It's an incredible high point. But this is exactly where the tragic downward spiral of the judges really accelerates. Because Gideon wins the war, but he completely loses the victory in his heart.
He really does.
The Israelites come to him and say, "Rule over us, be our king."
And Gideon gives the perfect, theologically correct answer. He says, "I will not rule over you, and my son will not rule over you. The Lord will rule over you."
Sounds great, right?
But his actions immediately contradict his words. He asks the army to give him the golden earrings they plundered from the dead Midianites,
Which amounted to over 40 pounds of solid gold.
He takes that gold and fashions an ephod. Now, an ephod was supposed to be a specific garment worn only by the high priest, but Gideon makes a massive golden replica of it and sets it up in his hometown as a monument to his own victory.
And what happens?
The text states tragically that all Israel went whoring after it there, and it became a snare to Gideon and to his family. He tore down the altar of Baal, but he replaced it with an idol of his own making.
And he didn't stop there. He claimed he didn't want to be a king, but he started acting exactly like a corrupt, ancient Near Eastern monarch. He took many wives, amassed wealth, had 70 sons, and he even named one of his sons Abimelech.
Which is incredibly telling because the name Abimelech literally translates to, "My father is king."
Which leads us directly into the story of that son, Abimelech. The sources refer to him as the anti-judge. He is pure, distilled ambition.
Abimelech was Gideon's son by a concubine in the city of Shechem. After Gideon dies, Abimelech decides he doesn't want to share the legacy.
So what does he do?
He goes to the leaders of Shechem and asks, "Is it better for you that all 70 of Gideon's sons rule over you, or that one rule over you? Remember that I am your own flesh and bone." He leverages identity politics to start a conspiracy.
They give him 70 pieces of silver from the temple of their pagan god, Baal-berith. Abimelech uses that blood money to hire a band of ruthless mercenaries.
Right.
They march to his father's house in Ophrah, round up all 70 of his half-brothers, and systematically slaughter them on a single stone. Only the very youngest, a boy named Jotham, manages to hide and escape.
It is the first massive internal political purge in Israel's history. Abimelech builds his throne on a foundation of fratricide.
And the surviving brother, Jotham, delivers this haunting, brilliant warning before he flees into exile. It's known as the parable of the trees. Let's expand on this metaphor because it is incredibly potent for today.
Jotham says that once upon a time, the trees of the forest decided to anoint a king over themselves. First, they go to the olive tree and say, "Reign over us." But the olive tree says, "Should I leave my abundance, by which gods and men are honored, and go hold sway over the trees?"
Okay, so the olive tree says no.
Right. So they go to the fig tree. The fig tree says, "Should I leave my sweetness and my good fruit to go hold sway over the trees?" They go to the vine. The vine says, "Should I leave my wine that cheers God and men to go hold sway over the trees?"
All the productive, useful, value-creating members of society are far too busy actually producing good things to bother with the messy, corrupt pursuit of political power.
Exactly. So in desperation, the trees finally go to the bramble bush, the thorn bush.
The worst option.
The bramble produces no fruit, it provides no shade, and it is highly flammable. And the bramble arrogantly replies, "If in good faith you are anointing me king over you, then come and take refuge in my shade. But if not, let fire come out of the bramble and devour the cedars of Lebanon."
It is a devastating critique of toxic, self-serving leadership. The worst, least qualified people are often the most eager for power. Jotham basically tells the city of Shechem, "You just elected a thorn bush, and it is going to burn you all to the ground."
And Jotham's prophecy is fulfilled to the letter. After 3 years, a bitter civil war breaks out between Abimelech and the very leaders of Shechem who funded his rise.
And the violence is appalling.
Abimelech eventually captures Shechem, slaughters the inhabitants, sows the ruined city with salt so nothing will ever grow there again, and then burns 1,000 men and women alive who had taken refuge in a tower.
But his own end is so fitting. He moves on to attack another city called Thebes. He's about to set their tower on fire. But as he's standing at the base of the wall, an unnamed woman drops an upper millstone from the roof.
Which is heavy.
It lands directly on his head, crushing his skull. And in his final, pathetic act of vanity, as he lies dying in the dirt, he begs his armor-bearer to run him through with a sword so that history wouldn't record that he was killed by a woman.
He was entirely consumed by his own image, right to his last breath.
How do these compounding leadership failures damage the nation as a whole? Let's contrast this with actual faithful governance.
Well, if you look at biblical models of faithful leadership like Moses, or eventually King David at his best, the core operating principle is the shepherd.
A shepherd.
Yes, a shepherd prioritizes the spiritual health, safety, and guidance of the flock, often at great personal cost. But leaders like Gideon in his later years, and certainly Abimelech, view leadership merely as a vehicle for personal enrichment, vengeance, or monument building.
They lose the whole point of leadership.
When leaders lack fundamental moral integrity, the society fractures beneath them. The people have no true north, so they default to their basest instincts, accelerating the cycle of national decline.
Which brings us to the tragedy of Jephthah. Here is a man who is a victim of his society's cruelty, who rises to power, but is entirely undone by his own theological ignorance.
Jephthah's story is heartbreaking. He's the son of a prostitute. His half-brothers despise him and drive him out of his home so he won't get an inheritance.
So he becomes an outcast.
He flees to the land of Tob and becomes a sort of ancient, ruthless Robin Hood. He gathers a band of worthless fellows, outlaws, and mercenaries, and builds a fearsome reputation as a warlord.
But then the Ammonites attack Israel. The Israelite elders in Gilead panic because they have no military commander. So they swallow their pride, travel to the land of Tob, and literally beg the outcast Jephthah to come back and lead their army.
And Jephthah actually begins his tenure quite well. He demonstrates a surprisingly deep knowledge of Israelite history. He attempts to avoid war by sending messengers to the Ammonite king, laying out a detailed, historically accurate argument based on the Torah about why Israel has a legal right to the land.
Right. And when diplomacy fails, the text says the Spirit of the Lord comes upon Jephthah. He is empowered for victory.
But right before the battle, he makes a catastrophic, unforced error. He makes a rash vow to God.
He says, "If you will give the Ammonites into my hand, then whatever comes out from the doors of my house to meet me when I return in peace shall be the Lord's, and I will offer it up for a burnt offering."
He wins the war. He crushes the Ammonites. He travels back to his home in triumph. And who is the first person to come out the doors of his house to celebrate his victory?
His one and only child, his daughter, dancing with tambourines.
It is an agonizing moment. Jephthah tears his clothes in horror. Now, to be fair to the textual debates, conservative historical scholars are somewhat divided on the ultimate outcome.
Right. Some argue he literally sacrificed her as a burnt offering.
Yes. Others argue that because human sacrifice was an abomination to God, Jephthah instead dedicated her to perpetual virginity and lifelong service at the tabernacle, which meant his family line would end a massive tragedy in the ancient world.
The text itself is brutally restrained. It simply says, he did with her according to his vow that he had made.
But either way, the core issue here is the mechanism of syncretism we talked about earlier. Jephthah thinks he has to bribe the God of the universe to secure a victory.
Exactly. He is projecting the transactional, bloodthirsty demands of the Canaanite gods onto Yahweh.
It is profound theological illiteracy. He didn't understand the character of the God he was serving. This demonstrates how deeply the Canaanite worldview had infected the Israelite mind. Even their highest leaders, their deliverers, were fundamentally corrupted by the culture they were supposed to be displacing.
And Jephthah's story ends not in peace, but in a horrific civil war with the neighboring tribe of Ephraim. The Ephraimites are insulted that they weren't invited to the initial battle. They attack Jephthah. Jephthah's forces defeat them, capture the shallow crossings of the Jordan River, and institute a linguistic test.
The famous password.
Anyone trying to cross has to say the word shibboleth. Because the Ephraimites had a regional dialect, they couldn't pronounce the sh sound and would say sibboleth.
It was a lethal password. 42,000 Israelites from the tribe of Ephraim were slaughtered at the riverbanks by their own countrymen over a pronunciation. The nation is turning its swords inward.
We are witnessing the total unraveling of a society, from bad to worse to catastrophic. Which brings us to the final and undoubtedly the most famous judge of the entire era, Samson. Our sources refer to Samson as the ultimate anti-judge. He is the mirror image of the nation's failure.
Samson's life is a masterclass in squandered potential. Unlike the other judges who were called as adults, Samson's birth was miraculously announced by the angel of the Lord. He was appointed to be a Nazarite from the womb.
Let's explain that Nazarite vow. It was a vow of extreme dedication and separation to God. He was forbidden to ever cut his hair, forbidden to drink wine or eat anything from the grapevine, and strictly forbidden to ever touch a dead body.
His entire existence was supposed to be a visible, walking testimony of holy discipline.
But from the moment he reaches adulthood, Samson's life is characterized by exactly the opposite. He is entirely driven by his fleshly appetites and his immense ego. He is gifted with supernatural physical strength by the Holy Spirit, but he has absolutely zero spirit-formed character.
The very first thing he does is demand that his parents arrange a marriage for him with a Philistine woman, the very oppressors he was commissioned to defeat.
He literally says, "Get her for me, for she is right in my eyes." He doesn't care about the law. He cares about his lust. And he systematically breaks every single tenet of his Nazarite vow. He tears a lion apart with his bare hands and then later scoops honey out of its rotting carcass, breaking the law against touching the dead.
He throws massive week-long drinking feasts with the Philistines.
Right.
He treats his divine calling as a joke. He plays games with the Philistines. He sets foxes on fire to burn their crops. He kills 1,000 men with the jawbone of a donkey.
Yeah.
It's all chaotic, solitary, vigilante violence.
He never once rallies the nation or leads an army. He is a one-man wrecking ball driven by personal vendettas.
Which eventually leads him to Delilah. It is the classic story of the slow leak. He knows she is trying to find the secret of his strength to betray him to the Philistine lords. She asks him 3 different times, and he lies to her 3 times.
But he stays. He keeps playing the game. He keeps sleeping with his head in the lap of the enemy.
Until he finally breaks. He tells her the truth about his uncut hair. While he sleeps, she has his head shaved. And the most terrifying sentence in the Samson narrative is when he wakes up surrounded by Philistines and says, "I will go out as at other times and shake myself free." But the text says he did not know that the Lord had left him.
His presumption was his doom. He assumed God's power would just always be there, regardless of his compromise.
The Philistines capture him, brutally gouge out his eyes, bind him with bronze shackles, and put him to work like an animal, grinding grain in a prison mill in Gaza. It is the ultimate tragic picture of where compromise inevitably leads, blindness and captivity.
As you said, Samson is the perfect metaphor for the nation of Israel. Set apart by God, given immense potential, strength, and resources, but constantly seduced by foreign gods and desires until they are blind, weak, and enslaved to the very culture they thought they could flirt with.
Samson does achieve a final massive victory, but only in his death. His hair begins to grow back. The Philistines bring him out into the massive temple of their god Dagon to mock him during a festival.
Samson asks a servant to guide his hands to the central pillars supporting the roof.
He prays, one of the only times he earnestly prays in the entire story, asking God for strength one last time. He pushes the pillars apart, bringing the massive temple crashing down, killing 3,000 Philistines and himself in the rubble.
He began to deliver Israel, but he leaves the nation with no successor, no structure, and no hope.
Exactly.
And because the judges themselves eventually failed to provide any lasting moral or spiritual direction, the nation plunges into the absolute darkest, most depraved period of its history. This is detailed in the book's horrific final appendices, chapters 17 through 21.
It's important to note, these chapters aren't placed chronologically at the end of the timeline. They're placed there thematically. The author is essentially saying, you want to know how bad it really got? Look at this.
It is a portrait of total systemic anarchy. It starts with the breakdown of the home and the priesthood. We are introduced to a man named Micah from the hill country of Ephraim. Micah steals 1,100 pieces of silver from his own mother,
Which is a huge sum.
When she issues a curse on the thief, Micah gets scared and confesses. Instead of punishing him, his mother praises him, takes 200 pieces of that stolen silver, and hires a silversmith to forge a carved idol.
It is bizarre. It's a total inversion of morality. Micah takes this idol, sets up a personal shrine inside his house, makes an ephod, and essentially ordains his own son to be his private priest. It is pure do-it-yourself designer religion.
But then it escalates. A young man arrives at Micah's house. He is a Levite. Now, the Levites were the tribe uniquely designated by God to serve as priests at the central tabernacle in Shiloh, which was the national center of worship.
But this Levite isn't at Shiloh. He is wandering the countryside looking for a more lucrative gig. He is a religious mercenary.
Micah meets him, realizes he has a genuine Levite in his living room, and offers him a contract. Stay with me, be a father and a priest to me, and I will give you 10 pieces of silver a year, a third of clothes, and your living.
The Levite accepts. Micah is thrilled. He says, "Now I know that the Lord will prosper me because I have a Levite as priest."
Think about the depth of the deception here. Micah is literally breaking the first two of the Ten Commandments. He has an idol, and he is worshiping it. Yet he genuinely believes he can buy God's favor and guarantee economic prosperity simply by putting a religious professional on his payroll.
It demonstrates a society that has retained the veneer of religion while completely abandoning its truth.
And then the mechanism of consequence kicks in. Because the tribe of Dan is migrating, they failed to conquer their allotted territory in the south because they lacked faith, so they are moving an entire army north to find easier land.
Right. 600 heavily armed Danite warriors pass by Micah's house. They see the shrine, they see the Levite, and they simply rob the place. They steal the silver idols, the ephod, and the household gods.
And when the Levite protests, the Danites make him an offer he can't refuse. They say, "Keep quiet, put your hand over your mouth and come with us. Is it better for you to be priest to the house of one man or to be priest to a tribe and family in Israel?"
The mercenary priest instantly calculates the career upgrade. He gladly takes the idols and leaves with the army. The Danites march north, find a peaceful, unsuspecting, isolated city called Laish, slaughter every man, woman, and child, burn the city to the ground, rebuild it, and set up Micah's stolen idols as a rival religious center.
They establish a fraudulent, idolatrous priesthood that persists for generations. The religious foundation of the nation is completely shattered.
Which perfectly sets the stage for the collapse of basic human rights, detailed in the final and undoubtedly the darkest chapter of the book, the story of the Levite's concubine. And we must offer a warning here. The narrative is intensely bleak.
It is a harrowing descent into absolute depravity. Another wandering Levite is traveling home with his concubine. As night falls, they need a place to stay. They pass by the foreign city of Jebus, which is Jerusalem, but the Levite refuses to stay there, saying they should only sleep in an Israelite city among their own people.
So they press on to a city called Gibeah, which belongs to the Israelite tribe of Benjamin.
An old man eventually takes them in off the town square. But that night, the men of the city, Benjaminites, Israelites, surround the house. They beat on the door and demand that the old man bring the Levite out so they can sexually assault him.
It is a deliberate, horrific mirroring of the story of Sodom and Gomorrah from the book of Genesis. But these aren't pagans. These are the chosen people of God acting worse than the citizens of Sodom.
To save his own skin, the cowardly Levite does the unthinkable. He grabs his own concubine and thrusts her out the door into the mob. The men of Gibeah brutally gang rape and abuse her all night long. At dawn, they let her go, and she crawls back to the house, collapsing dead on the threshold with her hands on the doorframe.
The Levite opens the door in the morning, sees her dead, and his response is chillingly callous. He says, "Get up, let's go." When she doesn't answer, he puts her body on his donkey, travels home, takes a knife, and cuts her body into 12 pieces. He sends one piece to each of the 12 tribes of Israel with a message of what the tribe of Benjamin has done.
It is a gruesome, desperate attempt to shock a deadened nation into action. And it works. The other 11 tribes are appalled. They mobilize a massive combined army of 400,000 men. They march to Gibeah and demand that the tribe of Benjamin hand over the perpetrators for execution to purge the evil from Israel.
But Benjamin refuses. Instead of seeking justice, the tribe of Benjamin rallies its own army of 26,000 fierce warriors to defend the rapists and murderers of Gibeah against their own brothers.
This initiates a catastrophic, apocalyptic civil war. Over the course of 3 incredibly bloody battles, tens of thousands of Israelites slaughter each other. In the final battle, the allied tribes employ an ambush, burn the city of Gibeah to the ground, and systematically hunt down the Benjaminites.
By the time the smoke clears, the entire tribe of Benjamin is virtually exterminated. Only 600 men manage to escape and hide in the wilderness of the rock of Rimmon.
The nation suddenly realizes the horror of what they have just done. A foundational pillar of their society, one of the 12 original tribes, is about to go completely extinct. But they had previously sworn a rash, solemn oath at the altar that none of them would ever give their daughters in marriage to a Benjaminite.
So to solve a problem created by violence and rash oaths, they resort to more violence and rash oaths. They realize a city called Jabesh Gilead didn't send anyone to the war. So they sent an army to slaughter everyone in Jabesh Gilead except for 400 virgin girls whom they kidnap and give to the surviving Benjaminites.
When they still need 200 more wives, they instruct the remaining Benjaminites to hide in the vineyards at Shiloh during an annual religious festival, ambush the young women as they come out to dance, kidnap them, and carry them off as wives.
It is a breathtaking cascade of atrocities. The book concludes with a society that is cannibalizing itself. And it closes with this haunting refrain that the author repeats multiple times throughout these final chapters of Anarchy. The text says, "In those days there was no king in Israel. Everyone did what was right in his own eyes."
Everyone did what was right in his own eyes. That is the absolute definition of moral relativism, and the text shows us the literal end-stage result, a bloodbath.
But this raises a huge question. Was the core problem simply that they didn't have a human politician in charge? If they had just elected a king earlier, would all this have been fixed?
That's what people naturally wonder.
No, and the historical and theological commentaries are very clear on this point. The core issue was not a lack of human government. Israel was uniquely designed to be a theocracy. God was their king. They already had a monarch.
Yeah.
The laws were established, the morality was clear, and the provision was guaranteed. But by systematically rejecting their divine king, by ignoring his constitution, and by deciding that every individual was their own ultimate moral authority, human kingship became a tragic necessity.
It became the only mechanism left to prevent the society from literally exterminating itself. Human government, even deeply flawed human government, like the monarchy they would eventually get under kings like Saul and David, was better than the Lord of the Flies scenario they had created.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But ultimately, this massive historical failure points forward to a greater necessity. The Book of Judges demonstrates emphatically that human deliverers, the judges, will always eventually fail. They are flawed.
We've seen that clearly.
The subsequent books of the Bible will show that human kings will also fail. The chaos, the blood, and the anarchy of Judges perfectly anticipate the absolute desperate necessity for the true king, the Messiah, to eventually enter human history, to establish permanent peace, perfect justice, and a righteousness that changes the human heart from the inside out.
Okay, we have to bring this home, because this has been a heavy, intense journey. But we aren't ancient Israelites fighting Philistines with jawbones, and we aren't facing iron chariots. Yet the human heart hasn't changed 1 millimeter in 3,000 years. The sociological patterns haven't changed.
Not at all.
How do we apply this? How do we break this cycle of decline in our own lives, in our own communities, and in our own generation?
The sources outline highly practical applications for believers today. If you want to avoid repeating these ancient spiritual cycles, it starts with refusing to settle for partial obedience. We must aggressively avoid the religious fast food of our modern culture, the easy, comfortable teachings that demand no sacrifice, no discipline, and no holiness.
Strict adherence to objective truth.
Yes, sound doctrine is the only antidote to the slow leak of compromise. Just as Israel was destroyed by slowly adopting the values of Canaan, individuals today must be incredibly vigilant and ruthless about auditing what cultural values they are absorbing through their screens, their entertainment, and their peer groups.
And the ultimate protection against that cultural drift is intentional remembrance. We talked about how the breakdown started because the new generation forgot the past. In Deuteronomy chapter 6, God commanded the Israelites to relentlessly teach their children the laws, to talk about them when they sit in their houses, when they walk by the way, when they lie down, and when they rise.
We have to actively recall the past.
If you do not intentionally remember what saved you, you will inevitably, naturally revert to the very things that enslaved you.
That is profound. You have to keep the specific stories of grace, deliverance, and truth alive in your own mind, and you have to speak them aloud in your home.
But there is a final, overarching theme here that we cannot miss, the theme of God's grace. Despite the relentless darkness, the compromise, and the utter failure of the people in this book, the New Testament actually looks back at this era with a shocking perspective. In Hebrews chapter 11, the writer lists the great heroes of the faith. And right there in the list, he names Gideon, Barak, Samson, and Jephthah.
It is mind-blowing. After everything we just discussed, the cowardice, the fleeces, the idolatry, the rash vows, the prostitutes, the broken Nazarite vows, they are honored in the Hall of Faith.
Why? How is that possible?
It is the ultimate hopeful twist of the entire narrative. God's grace is so incredibly vast, and his sovereignty is so absolute that he can and regularly does accomplish his perfect, beautiful purposes through incredibly weak, deeply flawed people.
That's incredible.
Their inclusion in Hebrews 11 proves once and for all that biblical faith is not about achieving moral perfection. It is about trusting God in the absolute depths of your weakness, crying out to Him in your mess, and letting Him work through you anyway.
What a place to land. We have taken a massive sweeping journey today. We started with Joshua's unified, wealthy nation, and we watched the grinding downward spiral of the judges. We saw the mechanics of how a society trades its divine heritage for the cheap, destructive idols of their neighbors.
We watched heroes become compromisers,
Leading to total moral and societal anarchy, where everyone just did what felt right in the moment. And we've seen how Alexander Tytler's cycle of nations mirrors this exact same trajectory in our world right now, how abundance inevitably leads to complacency, and complacency decays into apathy.
It is a dark historical X-ray. The diagnostic muddy waters of our modern societal issues are cleared up by the stark, brutal reality of this ancient text. It shows the devastating disease of sin and apathy with absolute clarity, but it also relentlessly shows the persistent, unmerited intervention of the divine physician.
We've seen exactly what happens when a generation forgets its foundation. It only takes one single generation of silence to breed a generation of total anarchy. So the final provocative thought for you to mull over as you go about the rest of your day is this. What are you doing practically today to ensure that the generation coming up right behind you actually remembers the spiritual history, the struggles, and the objective truth that you hold dear? Because if your life, your words, and your daily habits are the very first and only history book they ever read, what are they actually learning? Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. Until next time, keep seeking the truth.
Join us every week for a deep dive into a book of the Bible from the story behind Scripture. If you'd like to read more about the stories behind Scripture, try Written in Fire, available on Amazon.com. It's the story of the destruction of Solomon's temple, told through the pages of the Bible and the voices of the prophets. The fire that destroyed the city and the temple did not end in ashes, but in a Messiah. Pick up Written in Fire on Amazon today.